Welcome to another edition, the week one edition of the DLF Dynasty podcast. I'm Dan Myler. With me, Matt Price and Ryan McDowell. Fellas, real football has happened. It kicked off on Thursday night. That game was a lot of fun. We'll get to that, of course. But first, let's talk to Ryan. Geez, we've been waiting so long. And, Ryan, I had a hard time watching football on Sunday. Not so much on Thursday, but specifically on Sunday, because there were a lot of disappointments, fantasy wise. You look at your scores and there were certainly some things to get excited about, but there were too many big names that really disappointed.
Oh, for sure. I mean, we know this happens every year. We spend 6 months telling ourselves we've got it all figured out. We know exactly who the plays are, who the targets are, who do we want to buy and sell. And then week one just throws it all out of whack. Pretty quickly usually. So, now we readjust.
Yeah, we adjust, Matt, and that's what we need to talk about, because there's going to be some over adjustments made at this point in the season when we only have one data point to look at. People will go maybe skew too far to the left or to the right when trying to figure out the value of some of these players coming off of week one.
Yeah, I think so. But I always say, like, you need to, if you don't want to overreact, that's fine, but you have to react in somewhat. And, not doing anything is sort of a reaction, depending on the level of player we're talking about. But, the thing, we know that things change pretty quick around here, right? So you got to do something. You have to make some kind of decision about how you feel about these players after week one. In some of those cases, it warrants it. Like, this is the new normal. In some cases, maybe you're a little less confident in a lower level type player, but you got to do something.
Yeah, that's good advice. That's something we'll get to for sure throughout the episode. There are a lot of things to at least determine what you think of what happened on on Sunday afternoon and even on Thursday night. We might as well start there, guys. We're going to go game by game, react to what happened, the most important thing that we saw in each game from a Dynasty's perspective. And that game on Thursday night, fellas, was a lot of fun to watch. A heck of a way to kick off the ceiling. Of course, the Buccaneers come out on top, 31-29. Tom Brady, the 4 touchdowns, just under 400 yards. And Gronk caught 2 touchdowns. Antonio Brown caught a deep ball for a score. Chris Godwin got in the end zone and nearly did a second time. And on the other side, Dak threw for 400, and Cooper went for 139 and 2 scores. Lamb got into the end zone. There was a lot of things to get excited about. But Ryan, from the Cowboys perspective, there was one thing that there might be a lot of overreaction that's happening in the Dynasty community right now.
For sure. It's Zeke Elliott, and no matter how great the performances from the quarterbacks and the wide receivers were, it seemed like a lot of that talk after Thursday was about Zeke and just what to do with him. And I think the immediate reaction was major panic. We're worried. He's washed. I saw a lot of comments like that. And then I think kind of,
cooler heads prevailed. Right?
Yes, exactly. Cooler heads prevailed. Thank you. And we realized, okay, we're still talking about one of the best defenses in the league. And that was basically, I mean, you could almost tell that was the game plan, that he was not going to be heavily involved in that offense in the way that we're so used to seeing him. So I'm not panicking on Zeke. I'm certainly not selling him low. I don't think at least anybody in really competitive leagues is going to be selling him low either. If you're listening to this and you think you can buy Zeke for a first rounder, absolutely do that if you're planning to contend this year. But yeah, I'm not worried about that stat line quite yet.
Yeah, that stat line ended up at 11 carries for 33 yards and just 2 catches for 6 yards. Really, if you watch the game, though, there wasn't a whole lot of space for him to, not a lot of opportunity. That Buccaneers front is so good and just clogged everything up. It was apparent that the Cowboys went into that ball game thinking we're going to need to air it out to stick with Tom Brady and Gronk and Brown and Godwin and even Mike Evans. It was a shootout from the get-go, really. Now, Matt, on the other side of things, there was some expectations when it came into it, at least in the fantasy community, that Gio Bernard would be involved in the offense throughout the preseason. Whenever the first team offense was on the field, it was Gio trotting out there on third down. That didn't really play out. Just 2 catches in the game, no carries, 12 total yards. And those came right at the end of the game when Tampa Bay was trying to score that final field goal to win the ball game. So when it comes to Gio, we certainly can't put him in our lineup, but how are we reacting to Bernard moving forward?
I just think in general we're probably avoiding all of these guys. You know, we talked to death about how Gio was going to be the new James White for Tom Brady, but it's maybe it's not the same offense. I do think you have to look at how these teams were playing. You know, it was clearly the run game was not working for either of them. We mentioned Tampa Bay's defense, #1 in the league last year in terms of rushing yards allowed, but you know Dallas only allowed 52 rushing yards in this game. So it was just an air attack, and you would think that would play into Gio's skill set, right? But just 26% of the snaps, like you mentioned. 12 yards, 0 carries, only 3 targets. Fournette came in at 65% of the snaps, and then Jones, he was benched after, you know, just six snaps after that fumble. He seemed like he was pretty much done for. So I think you want pieces of this passing offense for teams that are competing. You know, these are all other than Chris Godwin. These are all older pieces, so they're probably more for teams that are looking to win this year. But we talked about Antonio Brown too, and he came out and he seems like he is the wide receiver 1 for this team. Maybe not necessarily in terms of the target volume, but this is a passing offense, and we don't want any of these running backs. I don't think, at least through week 1. The one other thing I would say though about Gio, remember he was coming off of that high ankle sprain, so you know maybe that had a little bit to do with it. So just a situation to monitor, but I don't think we can put anybody in for week 2.
Yeah, it doesn't look that way at this point, Matt, because even if we were confident in a matchup, which we probably will be next week again against Atlanta on Sunday afternoon, you probably want to play a Buccaneers running back because game script would probably tell you that Tampa Bay will be ahead in that game. They'll be handing off in the second half. The problem, though, Ryan, is we don't know exactly who's going to get the ball right there. Most likely it's Fournette if Rojo is still in the doghouse a week from now, but nobody would be surprised if they're mixing it up with a different back in against Atlanta on Sunday.
No, not really. I mean, I mostly agree with what Matt said. Overall, I think this 3-headed monster at running back is one we can ignore. I would be worried if I was counting on Ronald Jones.
We'll get to Aaron in a minute.
Yeah, we'll get there. I might be worried about him too, but yeah, if you were putting Ronald Jones into your lineup or even considering him as, you know, as maybe one of your top backup running backs, I would be concerned about that. But really, I'd say the same thing about Fournette and Gio. Just echoing what Matt said there.
Yeah, the last thing we should mention, Michael Gallup looks to be out for a little bit after the injury. He did look good in the first half, 4 catches for 36 yards on 7 targets. It was Cedric Wilson that came in the second half and filled that spot, 3 for 24 on 3 targets, Ryan. He's a guy that we should be looking at the waiver wire for.
Yeah, he's performed well in this similar situation when one of those top 3 guys has been out. Did the same thing last year and was kind of a hot waiver wire ad for a few weeks, and I expect it'll be the same thing. Obviously, Dallas is going to throw the ball a ton, no matter who the opponent is.
The next game we need to touch on, fellas, is the Philadelphia Eagles trouncing the Falcons 32-6. Jalen Hurts was the story, 264 and 3 through the air. Also added 62 rushing yards, so a big time fantasy game for him. That first catch of Devonta Smith's career went for a touchdown. He ends with 6 catches for 71 yards. So everything from a Philadelphia perspective looked pretty good, guys. Miles Sanders was the #1 tailback, 15 carries for 74 yards. Gainwell was the one that mixed in a little bit, 9 carries for 37 and got a couple opportunities inside the 5-yard line. So that'll be something worth watching. Both running backs also caught some passes through the air as well. Sanders 4 for 39 and Gainwell 2 for 6. The story really here, Matt, is probably on the other side of things because Atlanta got things going early in this ball game. They had 2 long drives, both ended in field goals, scoring 6 points early and then not touching that scoreboard again. And it was Ridley who caught 3 passes, I believe, on the first drive of the game, ends 4 catches for 44 yards in the game. Kyle Pitts, another guy that dynasty managers were watching very closely, just 4 catches for 31 yards, had a little trouble along the sideline a couple times, only getting 1 foot in once, and then overly worried about the sideline the other time. What's your takeaways from this Atlanta offense, Matt? Because although we expect them to struggle as a whole, there are some big time fantasy assets on this roster.
Yeah, I think we just have to chalk this up to, it's a brand new offense. So we didn't see much of this team together at all in the preseason. As far as the starters on the field at the same time, we saw literally one Kyle Pitts target. So I'm not going to panic. I know there's going to be people out there say, "See, you shouldn't have spent so much on Pitts in both rookie drafts and trades, whatever it is." But he tied for the lead with Ridley in targets with 8. Both of them got that. They just weren't productive targets for us. So we're getting the volume that we want to see out of these players. No other wide receiver, got more than 2 targets. Gage got 2. Zacchaeus got 2. So we're not worried about the volume for these two. It's just this offense needs to come together. I'm not panicking. These are still players that I want on pretty much all dynasty teams, whether I'm competing or not.
Ryan, Mike Davis had 15 carries for 49 yards, caught 3 passes for 23 yards. But that second running back was Cordero Patterson, who carried the ball 7 times for 54 yards and also involved in the passing game a little bit, 2 catches for 13. So when it comes to this running back group, we've talked about Davis, that he's that RB2 that we were hoping we'd have on a bad team, really. It seemed like they were splitting that work a little bit today.
Yeah, they certainly were. That's obviously bad news for Davis. I know you've told our listeners to avoid him or not to count on him very early, but that's looking like good advice because it was Patterson who basically served as the RB2. I'm thinking about all offseason, because there were maybe concerns about relying on Mike Davis, that dynasty managers were chasing Quadre Allison or Wayne Gallman after he signed. Gallman was a healthy scratch. Allison is obviously gone now, a free agent, and it was Patterson who played a role. I think he's a waiver wire ad if he's still out there. And I know on many sites he's still listed as a wide receiver. So we'll see if that switches in the upcoming days.
The last takeaway from this game is probably Matt Ryan, fellas. Just 164 yards on 21 of 23 passing, no touchdowns, no interceptions. That opening game debut for Arthur Smith and that offensive coaching staff did not look all that good. Let's move on now to the Pittsburgh Steelers. They beat the Buffalo Bills 23-16 in a game that really swung on a block punt and returned for a touchdown. For the Steelers in the first half, it looked like that Bills offense was just getting enough going, and the defense was so good, just suffocating that Steelers offense. It felt to me, I don't know what you guys think, like maybe the Bills were going to run away with that game early on, but the Steelers defense was equally as good. Offensively, not so good. However, Deontay Johnson led the receiving group, 5 catches for 36 yards, and luckily got that score on 10 targets. And another big name from rookie drafts, Najee Harris, 16 carries, Ryan, for 45 yards and just 1 catch in the ballgame for 4. Are we pushing any kind of panic button when it comes to Najee Harris?
We are nearing our hand to the panic button on Najee Harris.
I like that.
We're looking at the panic button.
Okay.
Harris has been a huge story this offseason, ascended to the 101 in most rookie drafts because of that landing spot and because of his draft capital. And it automatically became a question of what's going to win out, the workload or this terrible Pittsburgh offensive line, which matters more. And most of us concluded that the workload, the amount of carries and touches that Harris would see would basically matter more than how poor the offensive line was. And that just was not the case today. He averaged less than 3 yards per carry, didn't get heavily involved in the passing game, despite Pittsburgh trailing early. So yeah, definitely not giving up on Harris after 1 week, but starting to be a little worried, I would say.
Yeah, a little bit worried, at least enough to throw up a pink flag. Maybe not a red flag, but it's definitely getting to that shade. I mentioned those wide receivers, guys. Juju Smith-Schuster, 4 for 52. Chase Claypool saved his day really with a 25-yard run around the end, but just 3 for 45 through the air. Had a really nice catch, leaping catch over a defender that went for like 25 yards. That was a big play and showed off his big play ability once again. But Ben Roethlisberger was under pressure the entire game. No time for routes to develop down the field, just 188 yards. The one touchdown pass, as I mentioned, to Deontay Johnson. No picks, sacked a couple times, just hurried the entire game. It was ugly. From a Buffalo standpoint, fellas, a lot of the same, really. Josh Allen got his 270 yards and a touchdown, also had 44 rushing yards, so it kind of saved his day fantasy-wise. But Stephon Diggs, 9 for 69, just 69 yards on 9 catches, 14 targets for him. Of course, we don't count on the running back, so nobody was starting Devin Singletary, although he was the only guy there, 11 carries, 72 yards. The rest of the receivers kind of wishy-washy, except Cole Beasley. He caught 8 balls for 60 yards, was definitely involved with his 13 targets.
Yeah, and I think he's a way to cheaply invest in this offense with Josh Allen. It's 1 week. It's the Pittsburgh Steelers defense, but previous to this season, he was a career 56% passer, and he's under 60% again today. Not going to be facing that same pass rush every single week, but Beasley is going to be a high volume guy, I think, in this offense, and you can get him for basically a 3rd round pick. Most leagues, just looking at the trade finder in a 1 quarterback league, Ben Roethlisberger straight up a 3rd and 4th round pick in a super flex league for Cole Beasley, Mark Ingram for Cole Beasley. So he's a cheap way to get access to double-digit targets some weeks. So something I'm looking at if I am hurting a little bit on my back end wide receiver, even if it's just a depth piece ad, somebody that's going to potentially pull you out of a loss on a bye week or an injury situation. So if I want access to this offense, I think it's through Cole Beasley at this point.
Yeah, I don't hate that for sure. He certainly was involved in that offense. It felt to me, fellas, like that Buffalo offense is going to see better days. Josh Allen looked good, even though he was under pressure, and even though that secondary for Pittsburgh was playing those guys so tough. Lots of bump and rug coverage, lots of physical play on those 3 wide receivers, along with the tight ends. And speaking of the tight ends, Ryan, you shook your head at one of those tight ends in Pittsburgh on Sunday as well.
Yeah, I mean, Eric Ebron, the veteran there, and obviously his days were kind of numbered when Pittsburgh used that day 2 pick on Pat Freiermuth. On my other podcast, Locked On Dynasty with Matt Williamson, who covers the Pittsburgh Steelers very closely. I asked him last week, how long do we have to wait for Pat Freiermuth to actually be a real part of this offense? And he said, I think he starts and sees more work over Ebron basically from day one. And that's pretty much what we saw, that the snaps were basically split 29 for Freiermuth, 27 for Ebron. But if you're picking between one of those, obviously you're taking Freiermuth, and we're talking about the 4th or 5th option on this offense anyway. So I just can't imagine ever starting Eric Ebron this year. If you're in a shallow dynasty league, he can go right now. And even if you're in the deeper dynasty league, you can't trade him. He's a roster clogger at this point.
Yeah, roster clogger indeed. Freiermuth, that 1 catch for 24 yards, his only target in the game. Ebron had 2 targets, 1 catch for 19 yards. The weird thing about that is they weren't always on the field together either. It wasn't like Freiermuth was just coming on in 2 tight end sets. He was the lone tight end on the field multiple times, I noticed in the game. So it seems like a timeshare at tight end for those 2 Steelers tight ends. Freiermuth did have the nice catch, though. He got up that seam. That looked like a nice play to me. Showed a little bit of his upside. The Vikings and Bengals squared off and went to overtime in Cincinnati on Sunday, and the Bengals came out on top, 27-24. Joe Mixon was really the story here. 29 carries, guys, for 127 yards and a touchdown. Samaje Perine, just 5 carries. So nobody else mixing in right there. Mixon also added 4 catches for 23 yards. The story really, though, is probably Jamar Chase. Looked really good, 5 for 101 and a score on 7 targets. His big touchdown, that corner was giving him like 15, 18 yards, and he just blew right by him. That's exactly what we want to see. All those comparisons to last year with Justin Jefferson, his breakout with the Vikings, those were the kind of things that Jefferson was doing. Just sneaky speed, getting over the top and making the big play. And that's exactly what Jamar Chase did. So, Ryan, we all worried about the drops, or at least that was what was portrayed in the media with Jamar Chase. And there were concerns with Joe Burrow and coming off the injury, and they didn't really address the offensive line. I got to say, as far as I watched a lot of this game, most of this game, I would say, and that Bengals offense didn't look too bad to me.
No, I thought they looked great. I mean, the Vikings defense was terrible last year, honestly, but really it looked like they had revamped that whole defensive unit and that they would be competitive. And Cincinnati pretty much did whatever they wanted, especially Jamar Chase. As soon as he was drafted, people were calling him the Bengals wide receiver 1, ahead of T. Higgins, ahead of Tyler Boyd. And then that kind of changed throughout training camp due to those struggles you were talking about. But here in week 1, he leads the Bengals in targets and catches and yards. He gets the touchdown, and he leads those wide receivers in snaps as well, playing 62 snaps. T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd, 51 snaps each. So, yeah, both of those guys I still like. I like this entire offense, but Chase is the wide receiver 1.
Yeah, Higgins went 4 for 58 and a touchdown of his own, but Tyler Boyd just 3 catches for 32 yards. There are some question marks for sure there. On the other side of things, with the Vikings, Kirk Cousins playing from behind for most of the game, 351 yards, 2 touchdown passes to Adam Thielen, who caught 9 overall in the game. Justin Jefferson caught 5 for 71 on 9 targets. And then Dalvin Cook, guys, he dominated that backfield, Ryan. 20 carries, 61 yards, and a score. Also added 6 catches for 43 yards. But we did not see much of Alexander Mattison. Just 1 carry in the game for 2 yards, and also added a catch for 4 more yards. That is not really what we want to see as a Alexander Mattison manager. We're not going to see any standalone value here.
That's exactly what I was going to say. No standalone value with Mattison, and unless Cook gets injured, there's nothing to see here. He was outproduced. Mattison, that is, was outproduced by the other backup, Amir Abdullah. And even over the past couple of years, when Cook has missed, Mattison has not really taken advantage of that opportunity. He's been a guy I've always tried to grab in dynasty leagues. I think I'm ready to give up, honestly. If I can get a third rounder, maybe a couple third rounders, that's probably pie in the sky at this point from the Dalvin Cook manager. That's what I'm doing.
Yeah, it feels like it's hard. That's a hard thing to do, to get to trade him right now for a 3rd round pick. Feels like he should be holding out for the opportunity and get a little bit more than that. It's definitely going to take a Dalvin Cook injury. As far as those pass catchers, guys, one really interesting point from this game: Thielen, the 9 catches for 92 on 10 targets. Jefferson had his 9 targets. KJ Osborne played the role of that 3rd wide receiver for Minnesota. He was on the field a lot. Lots of underneath routes, 7 catches for 76 yards on 9 targets. Very involved with this Irv Smith Jr. injury. They needed somebody in the middle of the field. And, maybe it's a few more 3 wide receiver sets than we expected. It's not like they didn't use a tight end. Tyler Conklin was on the field, caught all 4 of his targets for 41 yards, might be a guy to consider on the waiver wire as well. But KJ Osborne might be a priority add this week if you need some depth at wide receiver. Matt, if you had any takeaways from this game, what would they be?
I have none. You guys covered basically all of them.
All right.
I just made a joke about the stripes. Let's move on.
Oh yeah, you didn't like the jerseys?
No. I was talking about how the last week there was that article about how Jamar Chase couldn't catch the ball because he couldn't see stripes on the football. But
I thought maybe
like it worked out.
That was a shot at the new jerseys for the Bengals. But that whole stripes on the balls thing, he tweeted about that and said, no, that's not how it went. I said I dropped a few balls, and then they asked me what the difference is between the ball now and the ball last year, and he mentioned their stripes on it. So what a joke. It's kind of ridiculous. The 49ers, speaking of ridiculous, the 49ers
Oh.
were up big in the fourth quarter and ended up having to stop the Lions inside the 30 on the last play of the game. They went 41-33. Garoppolo threw a touchdown. But the story was really these running backs. It has to be, at least for me. This story is nuts, for Matt. We were talking about it before we came on the air. Nobody really knew what was going to happen with the San Francisco backfield, but really we should have. It's always chaotic. We never really know what's going to happen. And what do you know? Elijah Mitchell leads the backfield because of a Sunday morning inactive and an injury to a guy that's always injured. He carries it 19 times for 104 yards and a touchdown. Did not have a target in the game, but that helps nobody in fantasy.
Yeah, and we should see this from Shanahan. We saw him call Trent Sermon the fourth running back on the roster. There's some talk about Elijah Mitchell was active because he plays special teams, and Sermon maybe doesn't. So I knew we would be going deep. I knew we would go into the running back 3 and 4 on this team. Even Hasty got involved, but I didn't think it would be this early in week 1. So it's just going to be more of the same with these running backs. And then the pass catchers feel the same. Deebo Samuel had this huge game, 12 targets, 9 catches, 194 yards and a touchdown. Ayuk basically invisible. He was actually not even the second wide receiver on the field. Trent Sherfield was the first one on in 2 wide receiver sets. Only had 3 targets, but he did have a touchdown. And then Mohamed Sanu came on and played slightly ahead of Brandon Ayuk too. So, maybe it's this hamstring injury. But this is certainly concerning. And one of the reasons why we talked about maybe Ayuk's ADP was getting a little bit too high. And it's 1 week, but it doesn't necessarily seem like he is going to lead this team in targets. Certainly not every week, and maybe not even for the season. Kittle himself only got 5 targets. You have to think that's going to change week to week as well. So it's going to be a hot hand with both the running backs and the wide receivers, it seems.
The thing about Deebo was that those targets were all over the field. He was the tunnel screen guy. He was the quick pass guy, the slant guy, the deep ball guy. He was all over the field, and we didn't see any of those other names. You even mentioned Sanu and Sherfield, who caught the touchdown, and Kittle even to some extent. They didn't even feel like they were on the field. It was all Deebo Samuel and Elijah Mitchell after the Mostert injury. So I just don't know, Ryan, how we project this moving forward. It feels like the same old when it comes to the 49ers. You can't trust anybody. You can't trust the quarterback because Lance comes on the field and he throws the touchdown, came into the game later and nearly ran in or had an opportunity to run in a touchdown from inside the 5. So that shoots down Garoppolo's value. The running backs all work against each other fantasy wise. The wide receivers now, it feels the same way. So what do we do now, Ryan?
Well, it does feel a little like those old Patriots teams for sure.
Absolutely.
In that way. I think the Ayuk thing is really the story here because, there was a point this offseason where he was the top 49er being drafted in dynasty drafts, certainly far ahead of Deebo Samuel and ahead of even George Kittle. I believe Ayuk got up to the 3rd round in some of those mock draft, some of that ADP that we collect all off season long. And now he gets 0 targets. And, we've seen this before, right? There's been a young wide receiver who flashed as a rookie for San Francisco. And we were given hints all off season that year that we should not be relying on that guy, that we should not be valuing that guy quite as highly as we did. That was Dante Pettis. And we know how that went. That 49ers coaching staff saw what they saw, and he was never really a factor again. Now, I think Ayuk is in a different category than that. I think he's more talented. They've invested more into him. But in that preseason game a couple of weeks ago, we saw Ayuk and Trent Sherfield rotate in and out of the game and share snaps. And we did nothing. Like there was seemingly no reaction from the dynasty community or really the fantasy community in general to that. And now this is where we are, acting shocked when really we shouldn't be.
From the other side of the coin, Jared Goff, 338 yards and 3 touchdowns. So if anybody's forced to use him in Superflex, that went well against a good defense. DeAndre Swift, 11 carries, 39 yards, and caught a screen pass and took it to the house, 8 for 65 through the air. Jamal Williams, who we saw that Sunday morning report that he was going to be featured, he'd be the starter. He had 9 carries for 54 and a score, also caught 8 passes as well. So I just don't know what I guess if you had to start a Detroit Lion, it was probably TJ Hawkinson or Swift, and both of them came through because Hawk had 8 catches for 97 and a touchdown. But overall, I think the main takeaway from this is a reminder that Sunday morning reports aren't always all that dependable. There were people taking DeAndre Swift out of lineups, and he was just fine against a good defense.
Yeah, the ones from NFL Network are not reliable.
Exactly. Yeah, at least that far.
I think what we saw with the Lions against San Francisco is what we're going to see all year. They're a bad team. They're going to play from behind, and they're going to put up some garbage time numbers.
Yeah, they're that's all they did in this game, and that'll be just fine for fantasy, especially if it's Hawkinson and Swift that are picking them up, and that's what happened on Sunday. The Seahawks beat the Colts 28-16. Russell Wilson was a stud, 254 and 4 scores. Chris Carson was his regular powerful self, 91 yards, did not get into the end zone. However, Lockett caught 2 touchdowns, had a 100-yard game. Metcalf got in the end zone as well. So, Ryan, this offense looks like it's purring right along. Right at the beginning of the season, looked just fine to me.
Yeah, looked great to me. New offensive coordinator. I'm not so worried about week 1, week 4, week 8 for Russell Wilson. I'm worried about week 9 and on, because it's that second half of the year that they tend to slow down and struggle. So no surprise here that Russ and Lockett and DK were on top of their game.
The biggest thing in the game that happened for me was Jonathan Taylor. Wentz had 251 yards and 2 scores. All right. Taylor just 17 carries for 56 yards, but it was 7 targets through the passing game. Opportunities in the red zone to catch the football as well. Nearly scored in the first quarter on a screen pass that usually goes to Nyheim Hines. Jonathan Taylor ends up with 6 catches for 60 yards to save his fantasy day. On the other side of things, Hines was just fine, Matt. He was involved.
He was 9 carries, 8 targets. He just signed a big contract. I think it makes him the highest paid non-starting running back in the league. So they've committed to him. They're going to use him. I think he's a flex play. Is it too strong to say almost every single week with the way these wide receivers have performed, at least today? So Hines, if you can pick him up cheap, I definitely like that. On the other side, Rashad Penny again, you guys. I mean, 2 carries, out with a calf injury. Like I was buying back in this year. I was like, a 3rd round pick, sure.
Whoops.
Didn't work
That's
out.
your own fault.
It is, but it has to have. He has to be healthy at some point. I mean, doesn't he? I guess
No.
not. So now we're looking at DJ Dallas from last year, a talented receiving back, and perhaps even the ghost of Alex Collins coming back, who had fantasy value at one point so many years ago, as Chris Carson's probably a direct backup. Maybe those are waiver wire ads this week if you're into that.
So Taylor and Hines leads the team in targets with 7 and 8 respectively. After that, when you look at the wide receivers, Pittman was a disappointment. 3 catches for 29 yards on 4 targets. It was Zach Pascal that had 4 catches for 43 yards and hit pay dirt twice. So he should be rostered everywhere. Let's move on to the Cardinals and the Titans. Cardinals come out on top, 38-13. The Titans, if it weren't for the Packers, guys, the Titans offense was the most disappointing in week 1, at least this far into week 1. Kyler Murray just tore him apart. 289, 4 touchdowns, did throw an interception, but added a rushing touchdown. Going to be one of the top scorers at the position this week. DeAndre Hopkins was a magician in the first half. That catch in the back of the end zone was sick. 6 catches, 83, and 2 scores. Christian Kirk, what the hell? 2 touchdowns for Christian Kirk? Give me a break. It's messy with this wide receiver group outside of DeAndre Hopkins. Really, the whole team outside of Murray and Hopkins, Ryan, we don't know what to expect week to week. We're plugging those 2 guys in. Everybody else might be a dice roll moving forward.
Yeah, that's how it's going to be. AJ Green played 54 snaps, 37 for Christian Kirk, despite that big stat line, just 20 for the rookie Rondale Moore. I would expect Green's work to go down, Rondale Moore's to increase, and basically those three guys to kind of be interchangeable. It's going to be tough to rely on any of those three.
And it's probably the same for the running backs, Matt, really.
Yeah, it's basically a direct split. Connor out carried Edmonds 16-12, but Edmonds got 4 targets and Connor got 0. So, it's just a straight down the middle committee. It looks like Connor probably has a little bit more touchdown upside. Edmonds probably has a little bit more PPR upside. But both these guys are, in the flex range, it seems, every single week. But with the offense humming like it was today, then that's going to have some value for us, at least in some weeks.
I mentioned that the Titans were probably one of the biggest disappointments of the week. Ryan Tannehill, just 212 yards, did throw a touchdown and had a rushing score. So it saves his day, but wasn't all that impressive. Speaking of not impressive, Derrick Henry, 17 carries for 58 yards, added 3 catches, but whatever. Julio, he was whatever too, 3 for 29 and didn't look good running routes. He was covered like a blanket on those like deep crossers that we got used to him just dominating with Atlanta. That was not happening. AJ Brown caught the touchdown to save his day. The Jets, they got beat by the Panthers 19-14. Christian McCaffrey was his regular self, 98 yards on the ground, 9 for 89 through the air. Did not find pay dirt, so not the massive game, but still proved why he's the 101 in Dynasty. Sam Darnold, on the other hand, didn't look too bad. 279 and a score. He hit Robbie Anderson on a deep ball, had a rushing touchdown as well. So the Panthers looked pretty good. It looked like the same version of the Panthers from last year, to be honest. They spread the ball around. Now, the Jets, they have some young guys. Zach Wilson, I watched a lot of his throws. Looked good sometimes. Made a horrible throw on a 3rd down on a crossing route that should have gone for a 1st down. Spiked it into the dirt. So a couple of those growing pains with Wilson, but showed out already. All right, 258 yards and 2 scores. Did throw a pick. Corey Davis, on the other hand, 5 for 97 and 2. He's the guy to own and put in your lineup in New York. Matt, what are your thoughts on the Jets?
None really. It's just if there's any kind of discount on the 3 rookies, we're talking about the quarterback Wilson, the running back Michael Carter, and the receiver Elijah Moore. Use that to your advantage this week. One catch for -3 yards, only 4 targets for Elijah Moore. Did drop a deep ball that would have made his day a lot better. So Corey Davis is great, but I have this feeling that once Elijah Moore is fully healthy, he did not look fully healthy to me out there today. Once that does happen, I do think that script is going to flip a little bit. And Braxton Berrios, I don't think there's anything there, but I mean, if it's a low waiver priority and you need a back end wide receiver, I guess. The running backs were all garbage, so we might as well stick with the rookie.
The Chargers beat the football team 20-16 on Sunday. Justin Herbert, 338 yards. 1 touchdown, threw a pick, really didn't come through for fantasy. Was a disappointment. Probably won't be, or already isn't, a quarterback 1 for the week. Austin Eckler, on the other hand, 15 carries for 57 and a score coming off the injury. That sounds fine. No targets in the passing game. That's not okay. We need those targets. We need those catches for him to be a back-end running back 1. It didn't happen in week 1. I don't know if we have to worry all that much long-term, but it is something to watch going forward. Keenan Allen, on the other hand, 9 catches, 100 yards on 13 targets. Mike Williams, guys, had 12 targets, 8 catches for 82 and a score. The touchdown was nice. The dropped touchdown was not nice. The dropped deep ball where he leaped for the ball landed on his head, and I thought he might be badly injured, as he always is. That was not nice. So some things to work on maybe for Mike Williams. All the same things we've always expected. On the other side of things, in Washington, some big concerns. Ryan Fitzpatrick didn't return from his injury, so we have to think about that with all his targets. Taylor Henneke came in and it was fine, 11 for 15, 122 and a score. What are your thoughts about the Ryan Fitzpatrick injury, Ryan? How's that going to affect the rest of this roster?
Well, it's obviously not good. I mean, the members of this Washington offense have been targets for fantasy managers all offseason because of Ryan Fitzpatrick and his style, his ability to throw the ball down the field. And I don't think Taylor Heineke has that. So if this hip injury is serious, I think they said we would know more early in the week. Maybe you already know that by the time you're listening to this, but if that injury is serious, if we're talking about a month out or more, maybe, I don't know, maybe the whole season out, it's bad news for the entire Washington offense.
Speaking of the Washington offense, Matt, Antonio Gibson had 20 carries for 89 yards, 3 catches for 18 on 5 targets. McKissick and Patterson, the backup running backs in Washington, had 1 target each. This is the Antonio Gibson show moving forward.
Yeah, led the team in carries, led the team in targets. I don't know what you want to see. Maybe McKissick is involved a little bit more at somewhere down the line, but you would think that this would be a game for it, back and forth, kind of like this. Washington in catch-up mode a little bit towards the end, but it didn't really materialize for him this week. And McLaurin, a little bit disappointing from a fantasy day, but he caught all 4 targets, and that catch on the sideline where he just got his head like basically 180 degrees to make that catch. One of the best catches I've ever seen.
Yep.
So I'm not worried about him either.
Yeah, I wouldn't be either. Logan Thomas, 3 catches for 30 yards and a score. Last thing on Gibson, the nice thing about him, he had all the usage, looked really good. Stat line wasn't there, though, really. 14 fantasy points in PPR leagues. That might leave one last opportunity because he has that with that kind of usage, guys. He has fantasy MVP type upside, and you're not going to have to pay a premium after week 1 if you want to go try to pay enough to get him on the trade market. The Texans beat the Jaguars 37-21, so that ruins Trevor Lawrence's debut. There was some good and some bad for him, 332 yards, 3 scores, but the 3 interceptions. To me, I love the Laviska Shenault usage. 7 catches for 50 yards. 50 yards is like, okay, but lots of short targets. We saw that Deebo Samuel type role for him along the line of scrimmage. Also had 9 rush yards. I'm encouraged when it comes to Laviska Shenault. DJ Chark, 3 for 86 and a score. Marvin Jones scored in garbage time as well. As far as the Jaguars go, Ryan, was there any real takeaways for you?
I think if you were counting on James Robinson, which a lot of people were after the Travis Etienne injury, there are concerns. There was a lot of just uncertainty about what this offense would look like with this new coaching staff, with Urban Meyer coming into the NFL from his college days. And there's been already lots written and said about how that's going. Most of it is not good. And he's basically splitting that backfield between James Robinson and Carlos Hyde. It's another situation where it's going to be tough to rely on any of those guys. Carlos Hyde might be on your waiver wire. I would certainly scoop him up if he is there.
On the other side of things, the Texans, Matt, the Tyrod Taylor was good, 291 and 2 scores, added 40 rushing yards. Brandon Cooks dominated as a receiver, 5 catches for 132, but it was something in the running game that caught your eye.
Yeah, I mean, Ingram dominated the touches, especially on the ground, 26 carries, 85 yards and a touchdown, but Phillip Lindsay was involved, 8 carries and a touchdown. David Johnson, not as much as a rusher with only 3, but also got 4 targets and caught a touchdown pass. So I think it's going to be good luck projecting this group every single week. Mark Ingram got the load this week, but I don't know if that's going to happen every week. So I'm happy to take whatever I can get for any of these guys. If anybody wants to come calling with a 3rd round pick for Ingram, I'm probably going to let him go for that.
Yeah, I would as well. The thing about Lindsey, he got those 8 carries. A couple of those came on those jet sweep type plays, opportunities. They were around the goal line, inside the 5 or maybe the 10-yard line. But those were the kind of opportunities he was getting. David Johnson, on the other hand, pretty much null and void. 3 carries for 10 yards, did get 4 targets in the passing game, caught that touchdown. So if you had to use him, I guess he scored for you. I would not recommend using him moving forward. Let's talk about our friends over at Monkey Knife Fight. This is the DLF Dynasty podcast, and we are brought to you by Monkey Knife Fight. They are the daily fantasy sports site built for the rest of us. Instead of competing against professional players, Monkey Knife Fight is made for the average fan to have a chance at winning. Monkey Knife Fight offers the ability to play a wide variety of fantasy contests, including their popular more or less games, allowing you to simply pick if a player is going to score more or less fantasy points than the given line. In addition to the usual games for football, baseball, basketball, and hockey, you can also play contests in golf, soccer, NASCAR, UFC, esports, and more. Not only can you play these fun, unique games, but if you sign up at dynastyleaguefootball.com, you'll get a full year of DLF Premium for free. Simply log on to our site, click on the banner image for Monkey Knife Fight, and create a new account with an initial deposit. Monkey Knife Fight will then match your deposit up to $100, and your DLF subscription will be set up automatically within 38 hours. What are you waiting for? Go sign up today. Fellas, one of the better games of the afternoon on Sunday was the Patriots and Dolphins. Miami sneaks out a victory 17-16 to Tua Tagovailoa, 202 yards through the air and a touchdown pass. Also threw a pick, but ran in a touchdown, showing some of his upside throughout the game. Jalen Waddle, a surprising to some line of 4 catches for 61 and a score. Nice usage for him. So, Ryan, you watched this game. You watched Tua play. There was some good. There was some bad. What was your overall thoughts of Tua Tagovailoa?
I think you've got to be pretty happy with what you saw. I know didn't put up a massive stat line in the box score, but again, this was a low-scoring game. A couple of defensive-minded teams. I think this was just about best-case scenario for Tua. Next week he gets back Will Fuller as well. And this will certainly be one of the toughest defenses he faces. So even this offseason with Ryan Fitzpatrick gone, you think there would be it would be all positive news for Tua, but rumors of a trade for Deshaun Watson and things like that just seem to linger and kind of hurt Tua's value and expectations. And I think we can move on from that at this point.
On the other side of things, Mac Jones looked pretty good, comparatively speaking. 281 yards and a score. Didn't make the big mistake. No bad picks or anything like that. They used the running game through Damian Harris. 23 carries for Harris for 100 yards. Also caught 2 passes. He seems to me, guys, like he is a trustworthy guy, a guy that we can stick in our lineup at least as a flex. The 2 catches, if he gets those every week, on top of some 15 to 18 touch or run usage, he's going to be a RB2 for us and definitely a flex guy. From the pass catching perspective, Matt, Nelson Aguilar, 5 catches for 72 and a score on 7 targets. Jacoby Myers, 6 for 44. Do you have a feeling when it comes to these Miami pass catchers? Is there somebody that you really want in your lineup?
Yeah, I want Jonnu Smith and I want Jacoby Myers, and I think that's it for right now. James White is going to be nice to have in your back pocket if you need to plug him in at running back position just because of the targets he's clearly going to go back to getting with Mac Jones here. And I think those are really the 3. And Superflex leagues were obviously excited by Mac Jones, probably not as much in one quarterback.
Ryan, do you have any thoughts on the New England pass catchers?
Really, it's mainly what we thought going in. It's the tight ends. Those are the players I would want. Overall, though, I think this is like we thought. This is going to be an offense to pretty much stay away from. I do think they get the upgrade from Mac Jones versus what we could have expected with Cam Newton, but still not super high hopes for this offense in general.
The Chiefs outlasted the Browns 33-29, guys, and man, I couldn't feel worse for Browns fans. They had that game the entire time, and then Mahomes just kept working his way down the field and scoring. In the fourth quarter, Mahomes goes 337-3, added a rushing touchdown, so he did Mahomes-like things. Tyreek was the same, 11 for 197-1. Kelsey, 6 for 76-2. So if you had a Chief outside of Clyde Edwards-Helaire who had expectations, he came through. For the Browns, not so much. Mayfield wasn't all that good. 321, didn't find pay dirt, and threw a pick. Chubb was good, 15 for 83-2, caught 2 passes. Hunt got into the end zone in the fourth quarter, so that saved his day if you needed him. Landry was fine, 5 for 71. Are there any takeaways from this ball game, Ryan?
We saw David Njoku kind of come alive in the second half. He's a player that has had a lot of hype and expectations through his career from Dynasty managers. And I think now that we finally probably start to give up on him, he pops up with a good game. I'm not confident that will continue necessarily. Of course, Austin Hooper there to compete with, not to mention the wide receivers. But, we need to see what happens with OBJ back in this lineup. But I think what we saw from this team is pretty much how they want to build that offense. They want it to be based around Nick Chubb.
It feels that way with Kareem Hunt mixing in as well. That's what they did. Really, for me, the takeaway was your really good Chiefs are really good. Your really good Browns are probably really good too. And there wasn't a lot else to really talk about in the ball game. There was some maybe sleeper expectation for Donovan Peoples-Jones. He caught one pass for 4 yards. Landry didn't pick up the slack really. Hooper wasn't that involved. It just nobody came through for Cleveland as far as pass catchers go.
Mecole Hardman, nothing.
Mecole Hardman was a disappointment.
Is he
We're
Deshaun
used to that,
Jackson?
though, Matt.
Is he Deshaun Jackson? I mean, like, you plug him in if you need a boost and hope that he gets that long touchdown. Otherwise, this is what you're going to get: 3 targets.
Yeah, he's a best ball
19
guy.
yards. Yeah,
I don't want him in my teams where I have to set a lineup. The Broncos pretty much handled the Giants 27-13. New York scores on a last-second play to, I guess, make the score look better than it was. Teddy Bridgewater does what he always does, 264 and 2, didn't throw any picks, 19 rushing yards. Melvin Gordon had the big run to save his day, 11 for 101 and a score. Also caught 3 passes. Javonte Williams, 14 carries, so got a little more usage, just 45 yards, but you have to like the 14 carries. He caught 1 pass for negative yardage. And then if there's a big takeaway, Ryan, for this offense, it's probably the usage for Jerry Jeudy. 6 catches, 72 yards on 7 targets until he goes down with an injury. He missed a lot of this game, still led the team in receiving yards and catches. He looked pretty good, but he hurt his ankle.
Yeah, I hurt his ankle. I guess we can say it's good news at this point that it's a high ankle sprain and not a broken ankle.
Although that's never good, right?
No, it's just not
better
as
than
bad.
It could be.
Right, it's not quite as bad. We should see him back at some point this year, but it's going to be 6 weeks. It's going to be 2 months before we see Jerry Jeudy back in the lineup. He will certainly land on that on the IR list over the next few weeks because of that. So, it was certainly frustrating because he was living up to that breakout expectation that that's what we thought how his season would go would be the big year for Jerry Jeudy, and that's what was happening. Cortland Sutton was pretty quiet in this game, even after the injury. So yeah, definitely frustrating. Javonte Williams, though, I'm with you. It was good to see him actually out touch Melvin Gordon, and outside of that long run, he would have outproduced him as well.
So when it comes to the Jeudy injury, the question now quickly becomes who picks up the slack. You mentioned Sutton, and all the fantasy managers out there will raise their, wait a minute, everybody was saying all offseason how Sutton looks so great and how he's back to his regular self and looks really good with Bridgewater. Well, 1 catch for
14 yards.
14 yards on 3 targets will tell a different story. So maybe it's KJ Hamler, 3 catches for 41. I know at least a couple of those came after the Jeudy injury. So there might be a storyline there. Matt, if there's probably a big winner out of the Jeudy injury, and that's horrible, that sounds horrible to say, it might be Noah Fant, who looked good.
Yeah, it is Noah Fant. He led the team in targets with 8, 6 for 62. Not a huge fantasy day, but the thing that's been holding him back in my eyes is that he was going to be the number 3 target, but he might be the number 1 target now with Jeudy out. Sutton doesn't look all the way back, right? Only 3 targets today. Hamler certainly had a few nice plays as well, but Fant could be the leader in the clubhouse now in terms of that. So we might be looking at a top 6 kind of season for him, a true breakout season for Noah Fant. And I know the price is going to go up after this weekend, but some reasonable deals again in the trade finder. Darnell Mooney straight up, Brandon Ayuk straight up, Sam Darnold in a super flex league. So these are deals that are out there. Maybe if you don't have one of those elite tight end options, it's worth pursuing Noah Fant, at least for the short term.
From the Giants' perspective, Saquon Barkley just 10 carries for 26 yards, 3 targets in the passing game, only caught 1 of them for 1 yard. Not really a lot to talk about. Sterling Shepard looked like their go-to guy. 7 catches, 113 yards, and a score on 9 targets. Slayton also had 7 targets, just 3 for 65 on the stat line. Galladay looked limited to me. 4 catches for 64 on 6 targets. Nothing else really to talk about there. Speaking of nothing to talk about, how about that Packers offense? That was impressive. Holy cow. Aaron Rodgers, just 133 passing yards. He killed you in a dynasty league. Whether you're in super flex or a single quarterback, you're probably not winning the matchup if you started Aaron Rodgers. And that is ridiculous, to be honest with you. Aaron Jones, same thing. 5 carries for 9 yards, 2 for 13 through the air. A.J. Dillon had 4 carries, but there's no takeaways really from this Packers offense outside of the offensive line had their struggles. Rodgers was under pressure against a good defense in New Orleans, but there are major concerns here. Adams catches 5 for 56, so I guess that's fine. We'll see. I don't want to make any blanket statements that the offensive line needs to improve for this offense to really get on course. But, Matt, this Packers offense did not look anything like the Packers offense of 2020.
No, it was bad. With like 12 minutes left in the last quarter, Jordan Love is in the game, right? So you know if that happens, it's either going really well or really bad, and it went real bad. Adams, is still going to continue to be a safe option. Jones, I think, in most weeks, but then this New Orleans defense is one of the best defenses in the league. You said that maybe they had a little bit more of a chip on their shoulder this week, not even being able to play at home due to the hurricane that happened down there, Hurricane Ida, I believe, right? Yeah, there's no takeaway from the Packers. I think you continue to start the 2 or 3 players that you would always start, and hope for the best. I mean,
so there's nothing to take away from the bad team in Green Bay that played in Jacksonville. How about the good team out of New Orleans? They scored 38 points. Jameis Winston threw 5 touchdowns, Matt, just 148 yards. I read on the broadcast that's the lowest amount of yards since like 1948 that a quarterback has thrown for when throwing for 5 touchdowns. That's pretty ridiculous. Kamara gets in the end zone on that little shovel pass, so that makes his day worthwhile. 20 carries for 83 yards. And Juwan Johnson, 3 catches for 21, but caught 2 scores. The Saints defense is what set them up throughout this game. Jameis took advantage of short fields a couple of times and maybe took advantage of some poor defensive back play on his deep touchdown to Deontay Harris. What are your takeaways when it comes to Jameis?
I mean, he's playing relatively safe. I didn't see any of those typical Jameis Winston boneheaded throws. He didn't really get too much in the way of being removed from Taysom Hill. We got a couple of snaps here and there. So it seems like he's going to be a viable quarterback, at least in Superflex leagues. And then the other thing that didn't happen really for New Orleans that we all kind of thought was happened was Marquise Callaway, 1 for 14 on 2 targets. That was kind of a bust. Troutman actually led the team in targets with 6. But with this low volume, they didn't really need to do anything. The Packers were playing so bad. So we didn't really learn a whole lot, I don't think, from the passing a game from New Orleans either. And Alvin Kamara, who last year when Michael Thomas was out, just got a million. I'm being facetious here, or excuse me, elaborating too much here, but exaggerating. But Alvin Kamara, like 4 targets, I would have expected a lot more than that. But maybe again, it's just that they didn't really need him to do much.
That's what it felt like. Ryan, speaking of Callaway, I almost texted you on the first passing play. I think it was Callaway catches the ball. I'm like, oh boy, here it comes. And I think he saw one other target.
That was his only catch. There were the Saints have really turned into the sleeper team this offseason with Callaway moving up the ranks because of injuries and other things, and Juwan Johnson and Tony Jones as well. And all 3 of those guys contributed. Johnson was certainly the big star with the 2 touchdowns. But honestly, I would say the same thing about the Saints. There's not a ton of takeaways for that team either. They just got it done early, and that's really all that mattered.
Yeah, I'm worried about Winston overall. You mentioned that he didn't make that big mistake. He did make one really bad throw in the 4th quarter, tried to force it up the seam. It got picked off. The play got taken away because of the roughing the passer call, but overall, Winston was a game manager, in my opinion. He didn't do all that much. That throw that he uncorked to Harris, that was Deontay Harris. That was impressive. That that was a bomb. So, and then we all know Winston has always had that. So I'm fine selling Winston based on this big game. If somebody comes calling in a super flex league and they want to get Jameis to put in their QB2 spot, if you got the depth to do it, I'm fine doing something like that. He's still going to lose opportunities at the goal line to Taysom Hill. They have the big running game. So if Winston is a hot commodity on the trade market, I'd be fine moving on from him. Tony Jones Jr., guys, he looked pretty good in his opportunities. 11 carries for 50 yards between the tackles, runner, pretty much fell into that Latavius, not fell into, but filled that Latavius Murray void. He's going to have weeks where you're going to list him as a guy that finished the week as an RB1, potentially even, especially if Kamara ever goes down and misses any time. I was impressed with New Orleans. They had the best defensive day, in my opinion, along with Buffalo and Pittsburgh, who both played really good defense. New Orleans' defense, they put pressure on the quarterback. They covered like blankets. They looked pretty darn good. That was the surprise of the day for me. So that gets us through week 1, fellas. There's Sunday night football coming up. There's Monday night football as well, but this is what we will do week in and week out like we always do. The biggest takeaway from a dynasty perspective for every game, every week. So for Ryan and Matt, I'm Dan. Thanks for listening to the week 1 edition of the DLF Dynasty podcast. We'll catch you again in week 2.